Hi, everyone, and welcome to One Voice Evolving podcast, where we reclaim joy in DEI spaces, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our intent is to dive deeper than the surface and bring on guests who are raw, real, and relatable, shifting the conversation from head to heart for white women. I'm Kim Brasser, your host. Last week, I had a robust conversation with Holly Hartman, who is the director of the RAARE Woman Collective. RAARE stands for Radical Action Advancing Racial Equity, and it was illuminating. Holly is a super connector and helps women crack the code of communication by making safe containers for women to collect and collaborate, both online and in person. Her approach is rooted in belief in collaboration over competition, recognizing that by working together, we can achieve far more than we ever could alone. Holly's driven by a genuine desire to bring people and communities together in safe containers, leveraging their collective strengths and addressing complex challenges to create positive change. As the new director of RAARE, she also currently serves as Chief Marketing Officer for the WOW Network, Women Leaders of Louisville. Holly is passionate about advancing women's equity and racial equity and empowering women to lead transformative change. You'll love this episode, and we're so glad you're here. Enjoy. Tell me about how you happened from when I first met you at a RARE event to becoming director of RARE, and how that shifted the way you navigate what I like to call cracking the code of what's out there in DEI and what we are coming to it from a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for letting me be on. I really appreciate it so much. So, I would probably not be your average guest that you're going to have on because I know that you're going to be bringing on a lot of people that have been in this space for a long time. And the beautiful gift of sometimes coming into a space and as newer eyes is I might provide a different perspective. So, November of last year is when Dr. Nikki Lanier, who is an international racial equity advisor, hosted an event in Louisville, Kentucky. And this event was called the RARE Woman Collective. Again, Radical Action Advancing Racial Equity. And I came in as somebody that was a white woman going, I want to learn more. I want to do better. I want to show up in the world in a different place. And I'm personally a community builder and a leader. And I know that it's important for me to show up in certain spaces, all spaces, um, with the integrity of all people matter, all lives matter, but in particularly Black and Brown people. And that's what I'm learning more about in that vernacular. And so for me, it was coming into what felt like a safe container to explore and unpack what DE&I actually means, to cut out the noise of what is out in the world and really be focused with somebody that is well studied in it to learn more so then I can amplify that back out into my community.
Excellent, excellent. And you are a super connector. I have watched your growth in the last 6 months in every container you're in and new containers you're creating, and have learned so much from you personally and professionally that I appreciate your presence in this space.
Yes.
So tell me about your what shifted for you in Louisville at Nikki's
Mm.
first event.
So I am spiritual. That's just transparency there. I knew that I had this whole feeling when I showed up in that space that I was there for a divine appointment. I knew that from the moment that she came up on stage and the energy of the group. And as I looked around the room, that she was able to curate a group of women that were ready to make change. They were there on a mission to learn, to do better, to show up better in their spaces. And I'm also a trauma informed coach. So, coming in a space where you can create a safe container for people to have a conversation around something that's generally challenging. Even if you work in this space, it's still a challenging conversation. And so, for me, that's what was the big shift. It was, I now feel safe to ask the questions that I've been wanting to ask. And I also feel like I have a resource channel to then find the right answers because there's so much misinformation out there that creating a safe container where we can both ask questions, also do reciprocal. People get to share the resources that work for them, and we become a community of a collective that are all doing it together, because so much of this is a silo effort that we really need to come together as a collective to make a more amplified noise.
There's also strength in numbers, but
Yes.
the support that we found at the event and after the event is what allowed us both to be here today, 6 months
Absolutely.
later.
Absolutely.
And that container, it is difficult to find like-minded women when you are on a path you've never been on before.
Yes.
So it helps to know that you're not alone, but more importantly, that there is leadership in place that is reliable, trustworthy, and willing to sit in our stuff while we muddle through some messy middle of our own.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I first came to it because I had my own personal experience that I knew I needed to heal from. And it's not a healing experience there, but I knew I needed to have a place to unpack it, to then go, okay, what was that experience for? And how can I learn from it? And how can I change it and do better in the future? And so that was really what it created, that place to go, okay, that's packaged in a way that now I can use this for good, the experience that brought me there, and use that as a catalyst, as part of my story, to help other white women to feel safe to jump into this and join forces, because there's a lot of women like myself that have not found those places, and so they're just not having the conversation because they don't know where to have the conversation.
Or so in my case, and you've heard me talk about my white bubble. I live in this little convenient bubble that, if something's too complicated or too complex or too uncomfortable, I can just go back to the little world I've created and not and pretend I don't notice. I don't see what I see or know what I know or hear what I hear. And that is a flaw. That is not something I'm proud of. And the accountability and the connection is what has kept me from retreating when it got uncomfortable. One of the things that was a pivot moment for me in Louisville was what has DEI cost you?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's when I realized, as I was unpacking my particular story, that I was taught to be afraid of Black and brown people just because they were Black and brown, and all the stereotypes and all of the programming, when in fact, the only people who ever hurt me or were a threat to me were white people.
Mhm.
There was an aha moment that shook up that little inner story and caused me to rethink that.
Mhm.
How do you, if someone is just now coming to that place and doesn't have the opportunity to do a 3-day, 4-day event like we did,
Mhm.
what's a good way for them to consider what is racial inequity? What is racism? What does it cost you as a white woman
Mhm.
in that space?
I would say first get plugged into community, but I'm also a community builder. So finding like-minded people that can journey with you. Something that Dr. Nikki Lanier talks about is that this is a lot counterintuitive work. So we have a lot of programming that we don't even realize that's happening inside our body, around our community, because a lot of us have lived in a white bubble. We don't understand or realize the impact that's happening. And so really plugging into resources that are available. There's a couple books that I'll recommend that you can do. The RAARE Woman Collective is a free group online, so you can go ahead and get plugged into that right away. We have online courses that are available. We have other information that you can gain. We're going to be doing a newsletter. There's lots of ways to plug in to be able to start. Her TikTok channel has over 100,000 followers. There's videos that if you need to consume videos, you can go watch those and learn and go, oh, she puts words to what we're feeling, so then we can connect and go, that's the avenue I want to go to explore it. When I was at the event, she did they did a simulation of what the policies that were in place years ago, the laws and policies, and how that impacted racial equity as in today. There are other simulations online, so you can go go and look at those yourself. When I went through that, it was kind of an experience of the haves and have-nots.
Yeah.
And I had the have-not. And I've experienced trauma in my own history as well. And so I was able to tap into what that might feel like as what my reality has been. And it really helps with the empathy, because this requires a lot of empathy and a lot of grace, and not what I love she talks about is like, don't self-deprecate. So we don't have to apologize for being white. We get just to learn better and do better. So a lot of it comes of just becoming informed, looking for the resources, and be willing to have the conversation.
And then I feel like the one thing that I have learned from the work I've done and in working with other people is checking my reactivity at the door. You know, when I talk to you, I think about cracking the code of, how what words are helpful and what words are not, and what words do people react to and what words don't they. And even in social media, I found that if I say this is white women advancing racial equity, I get shut down on social media because of the word white. If I take white out and say women, now people can see what we're talking about. It's okay to talk about it, but it's not okay to put the word out there so the algorithm catches it and thinks you're doing something political. So in actual conversation, what are good pointers for us to stay engaged and curious when our own stuff might get triggered? What's the best approach?
Yeah, there's a lot of different words that are out there that are buzzwords like fragility and oh gosh, there's so many. We need to come, like you said, curious. We need to come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. And some people aren't ready for the message. So also don't take it internally that what you're saying is wrong necessarily, but come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. And that's with everybody. Come from a place of grace and love. And that is something that she really teaches, and I believe in as well. We have to have empathy because a lot of people have never looked at this. A lot of us live in our white bubble and we are uninformed. And so we don't have to put shame and guilt, because that's not going to move the needle. And what she talks about, that's not productive. So once we know that, we can learn and do better and do it differently. But there's a lot of other things, like she said, don't bash the white man. Like, so many people want to go after the white man. He's the problem. No, we all have been impacted by racism. Every single one of us. And it's so ingrained in the policies and the procedures and everything that we do that we're unaware. So if that's true, come from a place of curiosity and say, oh, why is that? Unpack it, look at it, ask questions. But there's different ways that we can start those conversations. And until we start a conversation, we can't really make change. And be mindful when you hear, if you had a word that was triggered, white, that's interesting. Why is that triggering?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand why that might be triggering for you? Can you help me understand why? I'm curious. Why is that word, you can just break it down to the one word. You don't have to, like, if somebody is triggered by a word, you can ask and be curious about that word, because you probably aren't going to get any further in the conversation beyond that, because they've already stopped. So that would be my be mindful, observant of body language, how people are showing up. And we don't have to change that person or that experience in that moment. And it probably won't happen, but you get to start the conversation. We get to plant the seed of change.
So you talk about our message, the message,
Mhm.
and when I do organizational development work in organizations in corporate America, for example,
Mhm.
they generally call me in when it's so muddy, the morale's shot, and people aren't getting along and they aren't getting their widgets built in a timely manner. And the corporate higher ups who call me in think it's a people problem. They want the HR person to come in and, axe 6 people so we can solve this problem. And I have to come in and say, it's hardly ever the people who are at fault. It is almost always either communications or it's a systems issue. And when I look at racial equity and the issues that it presents across the board in home life, in church life, in work life, in community systems, it is systemic racism from historically to present and to this racial equity issue. I see the same things. There is systemic racism that is fueling the fire that we all grew up in, no matter the color of our skin or the economic scale we were on. It is part of the water we're swimming in. And there is communication issues for sure. And cracking the code means learning almost like another language. Not saying the only language that matters is my language. The only experience that matters is my experience. And the message that we want to send is that racism can't exist in the go forward plan. And in a world where racism doesn't exist, then our mission is that we all what?
We have to show up with empathy and grace.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think that's the bottom current is empathy and grace, and empathy for past experiences, and grace in that as people are learning through it, but then also action. We can't just have empathy and grace with no action, because nothing will change. And so I would say those are the things, but it doesn't have to be a big show. It's these micro actions that we can do to shift, to make things change. And often it takes us first. We have to do the changing first in order to really make the shift out in our communities. And so that's the part that I heard at the RAARE Woman Collective event is she acknowledged some people aren't ready to do the work because they really need to focus on the self-care. Back in 2020 in Louisville, there was a big divide here racially. We had some really big, and it was nationwide news. And back in 2020, I wasn't ready to do the work. I needed to do my self-care so I could be prepared to do the work. And so it's empathy and grace, but we also have to be ready. And that means doing your own self-care and learning, but also being willing to take action to move it forward.
And so when you meet people where they are,
yes,
with where you are, it's like, I am not an educator here. I am not the teacher. I am a facilitator of change, a facilitator of conversation. And I am growing and learning every time I have a conversation. I love the podcast because I get to have conversations with brilliant minds and exciting leaders from across the board that are going to give me new language and new ways to look at first myself and then the world around me and how we got to be where we are. Yes. And what can shift, because reparations are critical. They're important. It's not enough to say, gee, I see it left a hole in your wall. I'm sure somebody can help you with that. Versus here's the team who's going to come around and help you be made whole again, not just patch what was damaged. How do we make you whole so we can all be whole? The level rises. If it rises for one person, all boats rise.
Yes. I agree with that. And I would like to share this one experience. I feel like it's important to share because you may not hear this from other people in their experience because I'm newer to the work. And when I talked about it being first us and us taking that time to make sure that we're being mindful of what we're doing and we're continually growing, just like you mentioned, what I experienced after the RAARE Woman Collective, event in November, one thing that I did different is I started to follow Black women leaders in our community and online and just started to see what people were doing and be really immersed. And some people listen to this probably already do that. It was not what I was doing before. What I noticed though, I was in a different position at the time and I was calling on offices. I was in medical sales and marketing. The interactions that I had in these offices were vastly different than the interactions that I had before that event. And what I noticed is the energy towards me was very loving, very generous of Black women that were at the front desk, staff members, nurses, people that I interacted with the energy had shifted in the way that we communicated with each other, to the point where now I am getting hugged by Black women when I meet them the first time. That was not happening before that. What changed? They didn't. I did. My energy shifted where I was open to, I was no longer in that fear, and I was in that space of, oh, there. So I realized there was a lot of programming that I had to deprogram. And even in that one event, I was able to deprogram it, and it didn't require a lot of action other than willingness. And then all the relationships after that has been incredible. So sometimes we think it's these big leaps, but oftentimes it is our own internal model that we have to question and challenge. And then things start to shift even without some big heavy lifting.
Mhm. And the fear factor, whatever the fear factor is for you, once you can address that, your
Yes.
energy automatically, what you attract changes
Mhm.
as well.
That's what happened.
So one of the things that I intend to do with this podcast and on our website, onevoiceevolving.com, is to create a resource list. So I've got a resource page, and every time I have a guest on, I'm going to take what their resources are and list them there so that people can see them. But I also would like you to share with us the things that you find valuable or you think are worth sharing that we're going to then put up on that page. Would you go over those
Oh,
with us?
absolutely. So part of the Radical Action Advancing Racial Equity RAARE Woman Collective is really talking about the racial equity piece. I know here on the podcast, you're talking specifically more DE&I, where this is specifically racial equity. So on that note, there are two books that Dr. Nikki Lanier recommends. And when you are able to have her on, she'll go probably more in depth than I can. But one book is Making of a Racist: A Southerner Reflects on Family History and Slave Trade. So this talks about some of the policies that were set in place that have created what racism is today. And then The Color of Money: Black Banks and Racial Wealth Gap. So those are two that are going to help in the conversation around racial equity in particular. So if you're looking for, I want to learn more about that in particular, those are two good books. But what I was able to create as part of the RAARE Woman Collective and part of my legacy plan that I got from the RAARE Woman Collective was RAARE Woman Collective conversation cards around racial equity. And so what we talk about with RAARE is that we can have conversations at home, at work, and in our community, that we have spheres of influence of conversation, that we can start these conversations. But if we don't know how to start the conversation, then nothing changes. And so these are conversation cards, icebreakers, opportunities for you to start to engage in this work in a softer, more helpful way. Because sometimes if we don't know what to ask, it can come off defensive, or why are they asking me this question? But you can bring these cards out and have really genuine conversations around what it means to them, because often we need to hear somebody else's experience so we know what door they're at, so we know what resource to connect them with. And so these cards are available online and you'll be able to get them.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Would those be, so those just fit in your pocketbook,
Yeah.
it fit in your purse, easy, right? Little,
Mhm.
I love them. Would those be useful for someone who wants to do a self-study, who wants to dig into themselves first, and they could use those and maybe journal their answers, or then decide to share them with 2 or 3 trusted friends?
Yes, absolutely. They are good self-reflective questions. They're good for opportunities that, like, so here's the community cards. And then so there's 20 community cards. There are 20 work cards. So you can have a work meeting. I actually met with a local organization that they have these conversations, but they keep having the same conversation. So nothing is changing. Like, here's the protocol of what we do. These questions might open up a different door that you may not have explored because you're not asking a different question. If you keep asking the same question, you keep getting the same answer. So sometimes these open up a different door. And then for your home, so you can have it in the car with your family at dinner time. I've learned a lot about my partner and what his experience is. by asking these questions. And then there's icebreakers. So if right now all you can do is just start the conversation as human being to human being before you dig in, there's an opportunity to build that, because connection and communication is how we're going to start making the change, not pointing the finger. So these conversations help allow that opportunity to happen.
So if somebody wanted to order those, where do they go?
They go to the rarewomancollective.com, and they're under racial equity cards.
Okay. And so RAARE is spelled RAARE.
Yes.
Woman singular collective.com.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. Thank you. Holly, are there any other closing thoughts? Anything we didn't cover that you think are important for our viewers to know, understanding that our viewers are midlife white women who have already maybe raised their children and find themselves with extra times, resources, and energy, and this has now caught their attention for whatever reason, but they don't know where to go.
Yeah, so for me, what I would say is, one, release any shame or guilt. Like, don't even bring that into the next step, because it's not going to serve you. So whatever shame and guilt that you have, that up until this moment, we get to make a change. And if you are a white woman that fits that parameter, please join the Rare Woman Collective. We need your voice. We need your support. It is a collective community where you get to share resources. We share resources with you. You don't have to be alone in it. And so we highly encourage you to join that. It's a free community online, and be open to what happens next from that decision that you make and say, yes, I'm ready to plant seeds of change. You will be amazed by what's happening in your life and in your world, and how things can shift so rapidly just by you showing up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side, the outside of this little container. And if people want to reach out to you personally because they have questions, or they need follow-up, or they need something you have to offer, what's the best way to reach you, Holly?
Yes, you can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn under Holly Hartman. I love connection, and I want to hear your story and what parts you're making an impact, and how I can connect you to the resources that I have to help move your projects forward, so we can amplify and raise the frequency of what's happening in the world together. Or you can email me at Holly H at the rarewomancollective.com for my email as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being our guest. I hope you have a wonderful summer, and we will be in touch soon.